Welcome to Sun, Sand, and Sold. I'm Josh Tomey, joined, as always, I like that little pop.
I like that pop.
By my co-host, David Aber. David, it's great to see you. You know, today, by demand of my co-host, I went neutral today, gray, black, like as blah as I could possibly think of. And you kind of went dark, but for people, get close to your screens, folks, for those watching, because this is like got some stars going on.
I went red, white.
Flowers? Is it stars?
I went red, white, and blue. I went Americana.
Can you lift for the camera? You got the red Ferragamo.
Red Ferragamos, white linen pants, shoes, and a blue and white shirt with a blue and white belt. I mean, I did it all.
This is like the Euro Floridian look. I like it.
It's very Euro. Quite frankly, it's Italian pants, Italian shoes, and a beautiful snowflake shirt.
Maybe in the future we'll do a live cast from Europe when we take a trip out there, and we'll
I would love to live cast from Europe. I think we should do Spain on your next Spain trip.
That would be a lot of fun. David, today we've got Daniela Marquez from CondoCONNECT, whom we both have interacted with in that capacity. CondoCONNECT is an interesting organization that, you know, is really an upstart that connects communities, homeowners associations, condominium associations with politicians, with city folks, with institutional and industrial professionals. And, you know, it's interesting because Daniela's a relatively young woman. And as we open the show, you know, it makes me ask that question of how are we getting the next generation of real estate buyers and folks who are moving here to South Florida, which we know a lot of are connected to the issues that you and I talk about.
I think it's got to be through technology. I think you and I know, even through our podcast, you know, I never listened to a podcast ever until, the Kelsey brothers I started listening to about a year and a half ago. And then we came up with our idea to do our own podcast. But I think young people love podcasts. They love Reels. They love TikTok. They love Instagram. They love X, my favorite, X.
X is even a little dusty. X is kind of like
X is getting dusty.
Well, it's like Facebook. You know, it's the original generation of social media. I mean, it's all right. But,
I think TikTok and Instagram are where people go.
Huge. Now, was that the channel? Because I mean, and I'm asking you, you know, both.
And by the way, we are on Instagram.
We are on Instagram.
I don't think we're on Tiktok. Because it's about to get, is it going to get banned or not banned? I don't know.
It's gone back and forth. We have talked to the PR people about the TikTok thing. You and me making reels independently we're going to fail miserably.
Well, because we don't dance. If you danced, then you'd make a great TikTok. I think you could probably do a better job of the dancing than I could.
I'm not sure that we'd be taken as quite as seriously as we want to. But no, listen, I'm serious.
Or maybe our wives could do the dancing.
That would be far more engaging than you and I doing it. But you know, I do think
I just think it's tech. It's all about tech. They're going to do all of their business online, on their phone, on their computer. That's just the way they do things. And I think that's the way they're going to be in the condo space. They're going to pay everything through their apps on their phone. And, you know, all of their communications are going to be through email or text and using whatever real estate applications they get.
Right. Because I got to compare it a little bit to the way the workplace has changed over the years.
Wait 1 second. I also think they're going to use AI.
Sure.
They're going to be using AI and say, hey Google or hey Siri. And they're going to say, tell me how you go about doing this, that, or the other. And AI is going to tell them.
By the way, you actually just lit my phone up by saying, hey, Google. As soon as you said that, there it goes. The question I would have for you is this a blank slate demographic? Are they so disconnected at this point from, let's say, that traditional condo demographic who now is retiring age? I mean, a lot of the people who are being most principally affected by laws like Senate Bill 4D, the post-Surfside legislation here in Florida. Is this a start over? Do we have an opportunity to cultivate a whole new generation, not only of interest, but of education? And if so, it's a little like the last question I often asked our guests, you know, what could you change or what would you change about our industry? What opportunity does that present folks like you and I to say, all right, look, if we had to do this all over again, if we had to reconstruct condo metaphorically from the ground up, what would we want to see different, and how can we educate, you know, our listeners and our viewers that way?
Well, I think that lawyers, management companies, software companies, real estate companies, they're going to have to provide this information in a way that is easy to digest, in 30 seconds to a minute, because that's the time frame that the younger generation listens. Everything they do is in short bursts. And I think we're going to have to meet that criteria in order to engage them. And I also think there is a difference between people pre-2008 and post-2008.
You're talking recession?
Recession. Because this newer generation has never been through a recession. They've never been through a real down market. They always think things are going to go up and be perfect. And that's not the case. In fact, the Senate Bill 4D and then the new legislation thereafter is making it much more expensive to own a condo. But, you know, if any of them were buying, they're getting priced out of the market by the New Yorkers and the people from California or Chicago, wherever they're coming from, with a lot of money. Young people are getting priced out. They have nowhere to go.
Right.
So how many of them are buying condos right now? In fact, if you're young and you're unmarried or you just got married, you probably will go to a condo.
Right.
The minute you have children, multiple children, people want a backyard, they want a pool, they want a white picket fence. And if they have to go an hour away to Pembroke Pines or an hour away to Homestead, they're going to go there.
Right.
And so I really question whether the younger demographic is going to live in condos for more than 2 to 5 years.
Right. I mean, it makes me think about, you know, if to have somebody digest, you know, a tenet, a basic principle of condo living in a short amount of time. I'm thinking about this reserve issue that we now face in condominiums, that, you know, capital reserves have not been executed properly. And now there's been a bill to fix that. Is the new, you know, is the quick digestion saying, if you do not pay now, you are going to pay later. And you have to remember that that's the first and most important thing you need to think about in a community association, is that by not paying now, you will pay later in any way, shape, or form. If you don't fix that leak, it's going to cost you more in the long run. If you don't properly fund your reserves, it's going to cost you more in the long run.
And that's why I think they're not going to buy condos.
Because the whole generation totally missed that, right? I mean, they basically missed that whole idea.
But the whole new generation is going to say, I might as well move into a rental community where I'm not responsible for any of that stuff for the 2 to 5 years I'm going to live in an apartment until such time as I go buy a house.
Right. And maybe that's where the balancing the market's ultimately going to come, because when you look at the cost of living in a condo, especially
it's much more expensive now. And I don't see the younger generation moving into condos with the current cost of reserves and special assessments. I just don't see it happening. Yes, there will be some that are very high end, that make a lot of money, that may have moved here from somewhere else. Yes, a person on Wall Street who works, you know, in private equity, who's 33 years old and owns 10 million in Bitcoin. Yeah, they can afford to move into a condo. But your average person, your average professional is going to look at a condo and say, this is not a good buy right now. It's not a good buy in today's world with the pricing of condos, the cost to live there. I'm better off living in an apartment.
And ironically, in some ways, and we spoke with a developer this week who was building a new ultra luxury residence in North Bay Village, is that buying new is actually probably more predictable at this point in terms of saying, yeah, the price point is going to be higher, but far more predictable in terms of outcome, because now they're all subject to the same laws. And in theory, if this is executed as the senators who sponsored or wrote the bill hoped, that's not going to be an issue in the future. So if I'm buying a brand new condo, if I'm doing, you know, pre-development, you know, purchase right now, by the time that condominium goes live, I feel like I'm probably in better shape than certainly somebody who's in a 30-year-old condo.
Well, that's presuming you don't have construction defects, which we see every day in South Florida.
And who do we call if we have construction defects?
Call Haber Law.
Haber Law.
And there are cases where luxury condos have 5, 10, 15, 20, $25 million worth of defects. Someone has to fund that. If you collect it in the litigation, great. And if you don't, it's a special assessment. I always say, if you're going to buy in a condo, buy 6 to 10 years after it was built, so that you can buy beyond the construction defect lawsuit,
right, and
before the 25-year,
right,
and buy for those 10 or 15 years where you know the condo is going to be good.
Right. It's like, you know, why I don't buy when the new phone model comes out, I don't buy it right away.
Right.
All the bugs are still in it. Basically say, now give it a year and then I'm going to pick it up.
Exactly. And yet there are people, shout out to my COO, Nilka Gomez, she's got to have it on day one.
Right.
Got to have that iPhone on day one. Me, I'm using the iPhone for 4.5 years.
Which is it's impressive. It's impressive.
I am an impressive human being.
Indeed, you are. I think your comment about the recession is, I think, really apropos of this particular generation, because you're right. This is a generation that has not felt the sting of that kind of economic retraction. It reminded me when you said it of growing up in New England, and
they haven't felt it. They haven't felt it in the stock market either.
Right. Younger Patriots fans, New England Patriots fans who grew up during the Tom Brady run when it was 20 years of always being,
they're not used
every
to
other
losing.
year in the Super Bowl. They had to learn how to lose, and it was like, in some ways, it was actually good for them. And I wonder if a downturn, though I'm not hoping for a downturn, is that some of the practical education and living that eventually every generation has to go through to understand what the outcome is when you don't properly assess things from an economic standpoint.
I agree with you. I think they're going to need to go through one, and I actually think they are going to go through one. As my father used to say, every 18 years.
Well, I mean, again, it's maybe not quite as predictable as the sun up and sundown, but it's relatively predictable.
Shout out to Arnold, who's in heaven.
When you look historically, I think when we're talking with Daniela later in the episode, I think for me, what's very interesting is kind of what the goals of this sort of connectivity is, because again, you're bringing a younger generation of managers and of facilitators together with, frankly, an older generation of owners and to say,
and board members.
Does that work? I mean, are they
going to
be paying attention to this?
She was a manager, and how she got into this space and how she created it and how she interacts with the legislators, whether it's Senator Pizzo or Senator Bradley or Representative Lopez or the people from BNA and BHA and people from the Aventura community and the mayor of Aventura and the mayor of Sunny Isles. For a young woman, she's very impressive in terms of what she's been able to do. It's impressive.
Right. And she's clearly capitalized on a social media generation because she's gained a lot of her traction that way. And again, whether or not, what's interesting is I got to imagine that's probably inviting more managers to the table, less homeowners, because the homeowners that are being attracted to that aren't not necessarily being driven by social media.
Right. They're not social media, but the managers are, the lawyers are. The legislators are, because legislators want votes, of course. I understand that. And how do you get votes? You take a picture with people and you have it out on social media.
Sure. Taking your Haber Law hat off just for a moment, how do you compare and contrast the idea of these, slightly less academic events like CondoCONNECT? It's not, obviously, they're not CEU events the way something that Haber Law might host.
I think they're good because they're practical, and I don't want to say dummy it down, but simplify. It's simplified, and the other part of it is you're asking a question of a state legislator, of a lawyer, of an engineer, directly at one of these events from the audience, and you're getting a direct answer.
Right.
And you're not waiting. You're just getting a direct answer.
And you're not asking your manager or your board member.
You're asking the guy who wrote the
biased.
You're asking the guy who helped write the law, or you're asking the lawyer who's interpreting the law, or you're asking the engineer who has to deal with the effects of the law, or you're asking the mayor.
Do you think, as an industry, and we'll connect this to our conversation with Daniela in this episode, do you think in this industry, are we overly fixated with 4D? Is it at the point now where it is what it is? It's clearly not changing. We've got to start looking at other aspects of condominium management and community building and governance, because 4D is going to be what it's going to be. Basically, we've just been told to do what we should have been doing from the beginning, and now it's time to move on. Do you feel like the ripple effects are still going to be so significant that we need to continue to study it and look at its variables?
I don't think so much 4D, but I think the subsequent legislation needs to be tweaked, because the subsequent legislation was to tweak 4D, and the next thing you know, we need to tweak that new legislation, because some of the things that were put in there are either confusing or too ambiguous. But I think the basic aspects of 4D, as you said, are here to stay. You have to reserve. There's no waiving of reserves. You have to start it in 2025. There's nothing you can do about that. That's the way it's going to be going forward. It's pay to play.
Right.
It used to be kick the can down. I called it kick the can down the road.
Right.
Now
the waiver of reserving.
Right. Now it's pay to play. You want to play? You want to be in a condo? You pay.
At what point from your perspective?
That's not changing.
Right. Then at what point from your perspective does there need to be more wholesale change of 718? I mean, and you and I have flirted with some of that logic in terms of saying,
I think they're trying
should there be a professional board member on every board as opposed to just the volunteers from the residents, if you will?
I have always said that some of the things that we need to do is to take the safety element out of the hands of lay people. I think that you must, on a safety level, when it comes to structural issues, it has to be engineer, community association management, lawyer. They have to make the decision regarding safety. I think leaving safety in the hands of lay people is a huge mistake.
Does that not automatically, therefore, tie in financial management because the implications financially of managing safety are probably some of the most enormous for these condos?
And that would require bringing in the accountant, the lawyer,
right,
and the management company. I think too many lay people sitting on boards in the past thought they knew better.
Right.
You know, I've been in business for 40 years. I ran a construction company. I ran a law firm. I've
had 2,000 employees.
Right. That doesn't mean that you're qualified to run a condominium.
Right. Because from where I sit, and most of my involvement in the development space is super high rise, right? 40, 50, 60 plus stories. And the idea of turning over this $500 million asset into the hands of lay people is kind of, I mean, again, to be blunt, is horrifying a lot of the time, because you're imagining saying there is no amount of business acumen that tells you how to run the infrastructure of an asset like that unless you have direct experience in it. And even when you do, you're intrinsically biased because it's your home and it's also coming out of your wallet. And so does that not put everybody in a situation where you're dealing with these large scale developments to say, really, that should be professional management top to bottom?
I don't disagree with you, but I think in many cases it's going to happen organically through the development of hotel condos, because the hotel condo space,
there's basically no common element anymore.
There's no longer a common element. It's a shared facility or shared components. The state legislature has allowed that. They passed legislation to clarify that, to, change the situation from two cases in particular, the Carillon case,
Icon
and Icon Brickell. And
yes.
they changed the law to allow the removal of common elements to be controlled by the board of directors of the condo association. And what you are going to find going forward with huge numbers of hotel condos being built is the developer is going to remain in control of the shared facilities or the shared components. And they're not going to put the 50, 60, 70, 90-story building in the hands of lay people.
Right.
They're going to continue to run it in large measure because they have skin in the game with the hotel and the retail.
Right. And they probably have institutional investment, which means they're going to have to maintain it to an institutional standard. They can't just say, well, we'll fund later if we want to.
If you have Ritz-Carlton or St. Regis or what, like Jimmy Tate has St. Regis up at Bahia Mar. And some of these people
they're not going to say, we'll get to the roof later. Right?
No, they have to keep the standard or you're going to lose the name brand.
Right.
And I think that's going to be the wave of the future. And in a way, that automatically gives you professional management.
Right. I was going to say, is that not just should that just not be the default at this point to say, you know what, get rid of common element, because you do that, you still have a board of directors who really oversee resident community, if you will. They
make the rules and regulations.
They still have a responsibility relative to community conduct and things like that. But when it comes time to deal with the infrastructure, and when it's time to paint the building at 7 years, you don't wait for this.
Oh, they always they've stretched it out to 10 years, 11,
15
12.
years. Well, it's not chalking too badly. And we'll put a little patch coat on this, and the building engineer will put some, hydraulic cement.
It's one of the biggest problems with condominiums is the failure to properly paint, because when you paint, you deal with waterproofing and you deal with sealants and you deal with sealants around windows and you deal with cracking in the stucco. it's one of the things that had it been done on a 7-year basis.
Isn't it amazing to think of how many of these cases could have been avoided had they just painted on time? That makes me think, is that the TikTok, right? Right there is to say, it's not sexy dancing, but you know what it is? If I can get somebody in 30 seconds to understand, if you do not paint your building on a rigorous schedule, you will cause these structural issues.
You'll have a $30 million problem 25 years from now. And the paint job would have been $750,000 4 times, which is $2.5 to $3 million. For $3 million, you would have avoided $25 million.
Right. I said something the other day.
That's just simple math.
It's like never cutting your
pay me now, pay me later.
Never cutting your lawn or trimming your bushes, and you don't do it for 2 years, and then you're going to have to bring a landscaping crew in to redo your yard because it's going to be destroyed.
You trim your bush.
You know, we're always right up against that edge, and it's a great time to take a break right now. This is when I do the deadpan back into the camera and ask Abraham for some on-set assistance, please.
That's going to get cut.
It's going to get cut. Cutting room floor.
But I really want to say, people tend to be penny wise and pound foolish. They tend to not want to pay the dollar now. And then they get stuck having to pay $10 later.
Right. Mortgaging the future for the present. I mean, it's a human condition.
It's not only the human condition, it's what our country runs on.
Right. It's the credit economy.
We live in a deficit economy. Right. We literally owe trillions, tens of trillions of dollars to the Chinese and other people because we live on credit. And that's what condos were living on. They were living on the edge, on
borrowed
credit,
time for the future. Right. Absolutely.
And that's got to change. And I think CondoCONNECT is a great way for people to interact with legislators, with local officials, with community association managers, lawyers, accountants, engineers, to find out, how do we resolve these problems? Because there are problems that will continue to arise for these people going forward over the next 10 years.
And that's what we're going to talk to Daniela Marquez around. Every once in a while, you tee me up perfectly for the transition. You did it perfectly. This was a layup. Just one time for me to say, I'm Josh Tomey with David Haber. You're watching Sun, Sand, and Salt, and we will be right back.